Welcome to the deep dive. You know how it works. You send us fascinating stuff, and we dive in. We're here to pull out the key insights, the surprising connections, the stuff that sparks those aha moments, all without you having to get bogged down in, endless reading.
Think of us as your shortcut to being well-informed, served up with, hopefully, a bit of fun along the way.
Definitely. So today we're venturing in some really interesting territory. It's thanks to a thought-provoking piece you sent us from Purchitai titled, "I'm Not Cruel, You're Just Not Qualified. Victim Blaming," according to Theravada.
Yeah, it's quite a title.
Yeah.
And our goal with this deep dive is to understand how Theravada Buddhist beliefs, as they're often understood and applied in Thai society, can sometimes lead to blaming individuals.
Blaming them for their misfortunes or lack of opportunities.
Exactly. Instead of maybe looking at the bigger picture, the systemic issues, we'll be exploring how this particular cultural and, well, religious lens shapes ideas about justice and responsibility.
Okay, so the article kicks off by suggesting that Thai society, which is, heavily influenced by Theravada Buddhism, it has this tendency to pin the blame on individuals. And it does this by interpreting their situation through, like, this idea of karma and a general acceptance of how things are.
Right. The core argument seems to be that instead of adapting systems to be more inclusive, the focus kind of lands on the individual's perceived shortcomings.
Okay, so where do we see this playing out?
Well, what's particularly revealing is how this shows up in various aspects of Thai life. The article points to the long-standing issue of fully recognizing female ordination.
Ah, the bhikkhunis, the female monastics.
That's right. While ordinations do happen elsewhere, in Thailand, there's this strong emphasis on the idea that the original lineage of female monastics is broken.
Broken lineage. So what does that mean practically?
It means, they argue, it requires a dual ordination process. You need blessings from both the bhikkhu, the male monastic sangha, and the bhikkhuni sangha. But if the bhikkhuni sangha lineage is considered broken, well, you see the problem.
Right, it becomes a catch-22. And the article quotes Longpo Payuto, who asks a really direct question, doesn't he?
He does, something like, women still have the right to ordain, but who now has the right to ordain you? If there is no bhikkhuni sangha, can bhikkhus take over the rights of the bhikkhuni sangha to use?
Which sounds logical on the surface, I guess.
It does, but the article's interpretation is that this essentially prevents women from being ordained because the male monastic community isn't willing to adjust the rules.
So the possibility of adaptation is there, but the rigid adherence to tradition, framed as upholding the lineage, effectively bars women, and the lack is placed on them, not the system.
Exactly. And this brings up a really interesting point about how flexible religious rules can actually be.
Yeah.
While the Buddha himself taught that disciplinary rules that were hindering progress, they should be changed, adapted.
Okay, so there's precedent for change within Buddhism itself.
Right. Yet, as the article highlights, we see inconsistencies. For example, there's a monastic rule against monks handling money.
Oh, I've heard about that. But you see monks handling money all the time, don't you?
Widely practiced, yes. It's largely overlooked or adapted due to societal changes and practicalities. But when it comes to female ordination, adapting the rules seems to be presented as this huge, insurmountable obstacle.
Doesn't that make you wonder why some rules seem more adaptable than others? It really spotlights where the priorities might lie, doesn't it?
It certainly raises that question. The article then touches on the unclear situations surrounding the ordination of transgender individuals, or Kathoi Bantek.
Right, another complex area.
Because there isn't a clear agreement on who fits these categories, interpretations can lead to exclusion, often based on whether they conform to, traditional male roles considered suitable for monkhood.
So again, it's about conforming to a preset standard.
It seems that way. This tendency to focus on perceived inherent qualifications, it extends beyond gender to issues of identity and even what constitutes human, actually. The next example illustrates this.
Let me guess, is this the movie example?
You got it. The Phenak movie. There's a spirit, a ghost, who wants to be ordained.
Okay.
But he's denied because he wasn't considered human. The question asked was, Manusosi, are you a human being?
Wow. So even with a genuine desire, the fundamental requirement wasn't met.
Exactly. The reasoning was he lacked that fundamental qualification. The article suggests this reinforces the idea that the individual is at fault for not meeting these pre-established criteria. It's about lacking something essential rather than questioning the criteria themselves.
And it's not just confined to religious spheres, is it? The article brings up a legal case.
That's right, the case of Supawit Chan Station. He's a lawyer who uses a wheelchair.
And he was denied the assistant judge exam. Why?
Because of perceived physical limitations, specifically in writing essay answers by hand for the exam.
Surely there are ways around that.
You'd think so. The court's reasoning, as the article outlines, centered on these limitations and also the possibility of, well, cheating if someone else assisted him in writing.
Okay, but the article points out alternatives, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Technological solutions like recording answers, having third-party observers, using computer-based exams, these things exist.
And it also mentions that in the actual job of being a judge, legal assistants are common anyway.
Precisely. So the focus seems to be entirely on a perceived individual lack, rather than exploring how the system could adapt or accommodate different ways of demonstrating competence.
So the article's point, running through all these examples, is that instead of looking at whether the system itself might be exclusionary or needs an update, the individual is seen as lacking the necessary qualifications based on tradition, appearance, this idea of perceived credibility.
That nails it, and it really gets to the heart of the victim-blaming argument the article is making.
There was that analogy, too, the shadow puppet one.
Oh, yes, the Nang Talun shadow puppet analogy.
Yeah.
Peake gets rejected from the Navy because he can't swim.
Right. But the counter-argument is
That modern warfare relies so much on technology, on intellect. Physical limitations shouldn't always be automatic barriers. The underlying message, again, is that the system's limitations, or its failure to adapt, aren't really considered. The individual is just deemed insufficient.
Okay, that covers the first major theme, how individuals are framed as not qualified. What's the second big idea the article explores?
The second big idea is how the belief in karma, specifically within Theravada Buddhism, helps to support and legitimize these existing inequalities.
Karma. This is central, isn't it?
It's a really key piece of the puzzle here. The article argues that this concept of karma can unintentionally justify social disparities. How? By attributing suffering and maybe a lack of opportunity to actions in past lives.
So it's like a cosmic explanation for why things are the way they are.
Sort of. Think of karma like a cosmic bank account where your actions create deposits and withdrawals influencing your future. This belief, the article suggests, can lead to accepting the status quo as somehow inherently fair, or just because it's seen as a result of past karma.
And if you accept it as fair or destined,
It can reduce the motivation to tackle the underlying structural problems causing the inequality in the first place.
the article gives some examples of this too.
Yes, some really powerful ones. There's the story of Somdej To, a very revered monk. He gets hit on the head,
Okay.
and he attributes it to past karma. He figures he must have harmed that person in a previous life.
So on one hand, that might encourage forgiveness, which is seen as a virtue.
It might, and the article acknowledges that. But it also suggests it can lead to a sense of resignation, acceptance, rather than actively working to prevent future harm or addressing the cause of the assault in the present.
It's a subtle distinction, but important. It raises that slightly uncomfortable question. At what point does accepting past karma maybe prevent us from addressing present injustice?
Precisely. It shifts the focus. Then there's the story of Kujatara.
Kujatara.
She was described as being physically deformed. The explanation given in the text is that it was because she mocked a Pacceka Buddha that's a solitary enlightened being in a past life.
Wow, so a direct link between past action and present physical condition.
Yes. It shows how disabilities can be, and sometimes are, explained as karmic repercussions.
The article even brings in scripture, doesn't it? From the Tipitaka.
It does. It references the Duchkaratavi Paka Sutta. This text links negative actions like drinking alcohol to negative rebirths, including physical and mental impairments.
So the implication, according to the article's analysis, is that some interpretations might see those with disabilities as, well, somehow deserving their situation because of past misdeeds.
That's the potential interpretation highlighted. Doesn't that make you stop and think about how easily these beliefs, perhaps taken out of a more complex context, could be used to justify suffering?
It absolutely does. It feels uncomfortable.
And what's particularly striking is another example involving the Thai courts, the case of Furthamuntham.
What happened there?
He was a high-ranking monk who was imprisoned for 5 years, then later acquitted, cleared.
Okay, so the system made a mistake.
Well, the article points out that when he was acquitted, the court's statement suggested it was his bad luck, or his past karma, or maybe the actions of others who had defilements.
So not necessarily acknowledging potential flaws within the legal process itself.
It seems to deflect from that, yes. It's presented as a way of explaining the suffering without pointing fingers at human actors or institutions in the present. almost like a cosmic, these things happen.
Like a cosmic shrug, as you said before. It seems karma can be invoked to explain away things that might otherwise require accountability.
That's the concern raised. The article also looks at how capital punishment is sometimes interpreted within this framework.
How so? Isn't Buddhism generally against killing?
Generally, yes, the first precept is non-harming, but the interpretation discussed suggests that capital punishment doesn't negate the possibility of the person performing future positive actions, maybe even achieving enlightenment in future lives. It's seen within a much longer karmic timescale.
Ah, I see. So the immediate act of punishment is weighed against a vast cosmic backdrop.
Right. And the article points out how this interpretation can end up prioritizing punishment, perhaps seen as karmic balancing, over things like rehabilitation.
Societal intervention.
Potentially, yes. Then there's the analysis of a specific Theravada prayer.
What does this prayer say?
It praises being born as a human, specifically with pure gender, which is often understood to mean male aligning with the traditional ideal for ordination and being seen as best suited to protect their religion.
Pure gender meaning male.
Okay. And the prayer then lists unfortunate conditions, things like disabilities, being born a slave as being karmically determined.
So these aren't presented as social problems needing solutions.
Not in this context. They're framed as consequences of past karma rather than societal failings that need to be fixed. It really underscores this idea that these conditions are seen as inherent results, not issues demanding societal correction.
Wow, that's quite explicit.
It is, and this connects with an observation the article mentions from Tamorn Sukpricha. He observes a certain fatalism in Thai society, a tendency to accept what happens as kinda unavoidable.
And this fatalism
Can then hinder a focus on the structural factors, the systemic issues that actually contribute to the problems people face. It's like saying, well, that's just how it is, or that's their karma, rather than asking, why is it this way and what can we do about it?
It discourages looking for root causes in the present.
That's the argument. It's interesting, the article draws a contrast here with the Navayana Buddhist movement.
Founded by Ambedkar, right, in India.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Navayana Buddhism actively rejects the idea of karma explaining poverty and social stratification. Instead, it emphasizes social inequality and government inaction as the primary causes.
So different interpretations within Buddhism exist.
Absolutely. It highlights that there are alternative ways of understanding these issues within Buddhism, but the article suggests this Ambedkarite perspective is less common in the Theravada context in Thailand.
Okay, so let's try and tie this all together. We've looked at how individuals can be framed as not qualified, and how karma can be used to legitimize the status quo.
Right. So to summarize this deep dive into the Prachatai article, it really reveals a specific perspective. It suggests that Theravada Buddhist beliefs, as they are often understood and practiced in Thai society, can, perhaps unintentionally, contribute to blaming the victim.
How? By doing those two main things we discussed.
Exactly. By heavily emphasizing individual karma and accepting existing conditions as somehow karmically ordained.
Which then overshadows the need to look at the bigger picture.
Precisely. It can sometimes overshadow the urgent need to address systemic inequalities and maybe adapt rules and systems to be more inclusive for everyone.
It definitely makes you think, doesn't it, about how the cultural and religious frameworks we live within can have a really profound impact.
A huge impact on how we see justice, fairness, and who we believe is responsible when people face challenges or suffering.
Yeah, it's not simple.
Not at all. And this leaves us, and you, the listener, with a really important question to chew on, I think.
Okay, what's the final thought?
Given this tension we've discussed between individual responsibility, often framed through karma, and the undeniable need for systemic change, how can societies find a balance?
A balance that encourages both personal growth and accountability, but also pushes us to create more equitable, more inclusive environments for everyone.
Yes. And perhaps what role could new interpretations or maybe re-examinations of religious teachings play in helping to strike that vital balance?
That's definitely something to reflect on. How do we balance individual stories and systemic realities? A lot to think about there.